What's up, yogis? You're in the machine. Mountain pose, Tadasana. It is such a basic posture. A lot of classes even start us out in mountain pose. It's an easy one to goof up though, and the problem with that is that nearly everything else we do in Hatha Yoga has the same pelvic, spine, and shoulder position that we set up in mountain pose. It's kind of a foundation for our practice. This is an easy little tutorial with 6 steps that will help set you up for success now as you practice later. Let's do it. Mountain pose. This is it. Unfortunately, so is this, and it's hard to tell the difference, especially for a yoga teacher who's just watching you from the front of the class. Let's break it down from top to bottom. First things first though, why is it so important? The position of the pelvis, the spine, and the shoulders, the scapula, that we set up in mountain is used nearly everywhere else in our Hatha practice. Tree pose is mountain with a leg in the air. Handstand is mountain with your arms up above you, upside down. A plank is pretty much mountain pose with your arms out front, down on the mat. From the bottom up, let's do a little inventory. 6 things can set up your mountain pose really well now and make your practice better and more beneficial later. So the feet are the bottom. That's where we're going to start. Feet should be close together, not crushed though. So I always tell people, imagine you could slide a sheet of paper between your toes and then like a couple of business cards between your heels. So they're just like a fraction of an inch wider than your toes to allow a little internal rotation as we stand. We don't want to find ourselves duck-footed in this posture. We want the feet together, toes barely touch, heels barely apart. You probably hear that a lot. Now the feet, let's ground them in to flex and activate the ankles and give us a real stable base. Flexing the ankles is kind of hard to do and sounds kind of weird, but if you drive your feet flat, like you're trying to push the ball of your foot and the pinky toe side of the foot into the mat, it'll flatten them, making them a little more stable to the mat, and you'll see those little tendons and ligaments or whatever pop up around your foot and your ankle, and you'll know you're engaged. Next up is the quads. It's important that we have stability under our hips, and that comes from the quadriceps and the hamstrings. So I want to engage my quads just enough to lift my kneecaps. I'm not jamming them back and hyperextending them. That can be really bad on us, especially as we continue our practice. And then there's a slight engagement of the hamstrings too. So we have that antagonistic muscle. That gives us a really stable upper leg. The most important part 3, is the hips, the pelvis really. We want this pelvis to be neutral. Sometimes people have a hard time understanding this, or they have a hard time performing it. You tell them pelvis tucked under and they just kind of shove their hips forward. What we really want to do is take this lumbar curve, this butt poking out, and straighten it so the tailbone tucks under. And again, some people, they kind of swing themselves forward. The easiest way to do this is to engage your transverse abs and minimize the space between the bottom of your ribs and the top of your hips. So from here, I just squeeze and automatically that tailbone tucks under. That's called a posterior tilt. The problem is that the spine moves as a unit. So almost every time I tuck the tailbone, my shoulders start to slouch over. So now I have to combat that with the 4th part, which is leaving this where it is. I bring the shoulders up, back, and down. So the scapula come together and they depress down my back toward the mat. It's almost like a battle between the top and the bottom of your spine. If you just relax and bring these shoulders up, back, and down, it tends to arch your back and poke your tailbone away. And if you just relax and tuck that tailbone, it tends to pull your shoulders forward. So we need to be actively doing 2 different things, tucking low and lifting high. Second to last, this helps put the scapula in position. If we rotate our arms externally and bring our palms forward, we also reach them down to keep our shoulders out of our ears. Some people will say that the palms forward helps you receive and that reaching the fingers to the mat grounds you with the earth. That may or may not be the case, but if you externally rotate your arms, palms forward and pull them down, it creates a little traction in the clavicle and puts your scapula together and down away from your head. Last but not least, part 6 is the chin. A lot of times in class, you'll see people doing everything perfectly and they're focused and kind of looking down at the mat. The problem is that takes our spine out of line, so you do want your chin up off your chest. It should be as tall as you've been all day. So remember, a little checklist in your head as you're setting up mountain. Are my feet in the right spot? Toes barely touch, heels barely apart. Are they grounded into the mat and flat, which engages my ankles? Are my quads engaged, lifting my kneecaps? Are my hamstrings countering that just a little bit? Third, probably most important, is the pelvis. Is my pelvis neutral? By engaging my core. Everybody always talks about their core in yoga. It starts when you're standing in mountain. Pelvis neutral, lumbar curve pretty much gone, not totally, but it's not poking out. Then battling that is the shoulders up, back, and down, kind of like you're trying to drive your sternum forward without arching your back. Palms facing forward, fingertips reaching down. That keeps our scapula together and it keeps our shoulders off of our ears. Last but not least, chin off the chest, mountain pose. If you set it up right now, it'll do you a big favor later, because everything in yoga, almost everything that we do, has the same pelvis, spine, and shoulder alignment that we set up in mountain pose. Thank you for being part of the machine. If you like what you see, if you find it useful, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring the little bell so you'll stay up to date with all the cool stuff I do.
But the whole point of the machine is to relieve you of that suffering.